Hi, this is Abraham from Designer's Bookshop. If you're an art director, graphic designer, or anyone that truly wants to understand what a grid system is in the context of graphic design/layout, then you've come to the right place. There's a lot of confusion amongst designers of what a grid system really is. You could be a designer with, say, 20 years of experience and still not really be sure about what a grid system is. And the truth is that a lot of designers, actually I believe almost most designers, confuse a grid system with the single element called document grid, which can be part of the grid system. We'll go through that in this video. So I just want to apologize in advance because I have a lot of notes and I want to keep this video as short as possible. So I will be looking at the screen quite a lot. And I also want to mention that this video is going to be divided into two parts. This first part is the theoretical part where I give you some kind of proof that my definition of a grid system actually is accurate. And the second part is more of a practical part where I show you the different elements, and maybe I'll even show you the plugin that we have for InDesign called Grid Calculator for InDesign. Anyway, let's get into this video. So I have a question for you. Have you or anyone that you know ever said that you don't work with grid systems or that you don't like working with grid systems? If so, then you really need to watch this video, because the truth is that all designers that work with layout work with grid system. So from my own experience, and I've worked many years with layout, I've developed my own methods for creating layouts and so on. I've never come across a good definition of what a grid system is. However, I have come across the definition of what a document grid is, posing as the definition of a grid system, and that can be very confusing. So I mean, if some designers hear the word grid system, they run the other way. They say, you know what, I don't work with grid systems and blah, blah, blah. What they really mean to say is that I don't like working with the element called document grid, but all designers work with grid systems. And I'm going to prove that in this video. And in order to do that, we need to look at a couple of definitions, and then everything will hopefully be very clear. One thing to keep in mind and to know is that grid system is just a name. It's a framework that consists of at least two elements or more. And once you have those two elements, you have a grid system. So we're going to go through that. Just keep that in mind as we move forward. So when designers say that they don't work with grid systems, all they really are saying that is that they don't like working with the element called document grid. And that's okay, because you can get away with not working with it, even though you should work with it at certain projects, but it's not always necessary. So as soon as they hear the word grid system, they associate that with that single element called document grid. And this is completely incorrect. So now that we have defined of what a grid system is not, let's look at what a grid system actually is. And we first have to look at the word system. Let's put the word grid aside and focus on the word system. So if we look at the definition by the dictionary Webster, they define it in the following way: a regularly interacting or interdependent group of items forming a unified whole. We could easily replace the word items with the word elements. So basically it would be regularly interacting or interdependent group of elements forming a unified whole. But we need to look at two more definitions, and the second definition we need to look at is the word group, which is defined in the following way: two or more figures forming a complete unit in a composition. So now we know, okay, we have to have two of something, and it's two elements, of course. If we have that or more, then we have a system. In our case, a grid system. But we have to look at one last definition to really get clarity, and that is the word grid. Now, a grid is simply an area that is divided into smaller sections. Now, unless you take the word system into account and you only look at the word grid, then the element document grid would fit the description. But because we are talking about a grid system, the element called document grid is an optional element that is part of the system, but it's not the grid system itself. Because remember, we need to have 2 or more elements to form a system. And those, we could have like margins and a baseline grid, and we have a grid system. Or we could have columns and rows and a baseline grid, and we have a grid system. So it's not dependent on the document grid itself. And this is where a lot of confusion comes up with for designers. Before I end this video, let me also read to you the definition that Josef-Muller wrote in his book Grid System, where he defined what a grid was or is. And he is completely correct. But sadly, if I am not mistaken, he never defines what a grid system is, nor does he give any kind of calculations or tools for calculating the different elements part of the grid system. So let me go ahead and read that definition. And it's very similar to what I said, but just as a point of reference, this is the definition he gives the typographic grid. The grid divides a 2-dimensional plane into smaller fields or a 3-dimensional space into smaller compartments. So basically a bunch of squares. But that is not a grid system, but it's what a lot of designers confuse and think is a grid system. So anyhow, this is the end of part 1, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.